Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Sorry for the inconvenience. We had to fix some technical problems. But nevertheless, welcome to the last keynote session of Hong Kong HKSYU University Evidence-Based Practice International Conference 2019. Evidence Matters, What Works for Learning and Teaching. We are proud to have Dr. Chen, the Associate Professor and Acting Head of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning of National Institute of Education at Nanyang Technological University, to be the speaker of this session. Dr. Chen received his PhD in Computers in Education at the University of Oregon. He has worked in universities in the US, Singapore, Taiwan, and New Zealand. His research interests include new media and learning, online learning, and research methodologies. He has been teaching doctoral level course on literature review methods and have over the past years developing a grounded approach to conducting literature review. He's currently the acting head of curriculum, teaching and learning academic group at the National Institute of Education at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Since Dr. Chen could not come to Hong Kong physically, we now have Dr. Chen on live webcast to present the topic Unpacking Evidence and Learning in Evidence-Based Learning. Dr. Chen, it's your turn now.
Okay, hello everyone. Okay, I can hear my echo. That must be right. Okay, thank you very much for coming to involving me in the conference, and it's my honor to share with you what I have learned throughout the year of my academic career. Let me just give you some. This is a Q&A QR code. So during the talk, if you have any questions, please welcome just to type it in, and then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. I'll try to keep my talk as short as possible. I prefer interactions. Okay, so this is the outline of what I'm sharing. Basically, I would like to unpack what learning is. And I also want to unpack what is evidence. So, and then hopefully we'll be able to discuss together, brainstorm together what kind of evidences that it is needed when we talk about learning, evidence-based learning. This is probably our common understanding of learning. There are basically 4 common schools of thoughts: behaviorist, cognitivist, constructivist, and social constructivist. I cannot see you, but I don't know whether you are familiar with all those terms. Do you need me to explain? Give me some hint, whether you are okay or not. I cannot really see. Okay, let me just quickly go through. Is that okay? Okay, behaviorist consideration of learning is that this is a very classic framing of learning. So everything is inside our brain, so we don't really know how to unpack it. So the only thing we can see is through observing the behavior. And therefore, this kind of framing triggered earlier understanding of what learning is. And then you can see all those educational psychology research focusing on observing behavior. Okay? So that is roughly what it is. And then later on, people think that this kind of framing is not sufficient. We really need to look into what goes into the brain. And therefore, the cognitivist framing came to play. And they focus on seeing the brain as a machine, like a computer. So you have input, you have output, and in between is how our brain processes the information. So the very famous information processing paradigm belongs to the cognitivist framing of learning. So this framing probably is the most common framing nowadays. A lot of schools are still focusing on this paradigm, focusing on the acquisition of knowledge and how we process knowledge. And our output is to apply what we have learned. Okay? And the constructivist approach trying to kind of challenge the cognitivist paradigm by focusing on that we actually construct our understanding. We don't really own knowledge. There's no such thing as knowledge. If we construct anything, we are constructing our understanding. So any attempt of knowledge transmission still needs our interpretation. So that is a very broadly cognitivist view of learning. Social constructivists take this one step further and think that our learning cannot be in isolation to our context. So it is always situated in the social context or a communal context, a community of learners. So for example, we learn when we were young in our families, so we pick up our family values in their family community. So learning is always social, situated in the social context. So this is roughly what is predominant in the field. People talk about these different kinds of learning, even though people may be using different terms, but this is roughly the mainstream. Okay, departing from here, I would like to share with you something that a little bit more nuanced. Okay, this is what I have drawn from different literature, and people have talked about, for example, learning is embodied. So our mind and body is always together. So we cannot really separate our mind from our body. Okay, so we can have mental processes, but the mental process doesn't mean anything if our body is not involved. And a typical example would be learning in music instrument or learning any sports. Is your mind and your body are working together to learn something. You can never be learning just through your mind. You cannot just learn swimming by just simulating how to swim in your mind. So learning is embodied, okay? Learning is also mediated. It involves our interpretation of meaning. And we do not have access to the real world. We are mediated by our five senses. Our observation is just an interpretation of the signal coming to our eyes, for example. So what we see is not the world. What we see is mediated by our eyesight. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Our learning is also distributed, and it can be from two perspectives. It's mind, body, tool. So we learn through not only our body, but also through the tools we use. So for example, I'm wearing glasses. If I don't wear my glasses, I won't be able to see clearly. So my glasses is a tool, but it also becomes part of my learning process. It's an inseparable part of my learning. And my learning is distributed not only in terms of my body, but also distributed to the tool I use. And further to that, it is also distributed to different parties I interact with, any individuals or any other social beings that I collaborate with. Okay, so learning is necessarily distributed. The next one is growth spurt. We all know that our physical body can go through growth spurt. The baby can be eating a lot of milk without any growth, and then all of a sudden it just grows. Okay, and that is called growth spurt. Our mental growth is also the same. It's not linear. So we could be trying to understand something. We try for many days, and then all of a sudden you have this aha moment. Then you kind of everything just fall into place, and then we kind of understand everything. So that is the growth spurt, and that's that point to that our growth, our learning is not linear. Our learning is also symbolic. We learn through using our language. So language is very symbolic. We use language to point to something we refer to. However, this relationship, according to linguists, they are arbitrary. It's all man-made. We decide how to call something. That something can be, in English, this is a desk. In Chinese, it's called 桌子. Okay, so we use different language or symbols to represent something we mean, but actually we are always at the abstract level, symbolic level. Learning is at this symbolic interaction level. It's not, we do not have access to the real world. Okay. Learning is also situated in any social context, so context matters. I think I don't have to elaborate on that. Learning is also communal. I mentioned that learning involves the community that we are situated in, and I use their family as an example. So your upbringing will affect your beliefs, your sense of identities, etc., etc. A good example of this communal aspect of learning is that a good school sports team is always good. A sports team can win, can be champion over several years. And why? Because this community, and this community holds a certain belief, including the skills and practice, and it got passed down to the newcomers. So that's how the newcomers learn from the old-timers. Okay? Learning is also ontological. It involves, it is very much related to our being and becoming. Okay? Our identity matters. Okay? I'm not going to elaborate on that. So basically, these are something that is a little bit more nuanced, and it's more than just the cognitive processes that we are so familiar with in our schools. Okay? I think I'll skip this slide because we are running late, and I really want to save some time for discussion. Basically, what I'm promoting is that we should be working towards organic learning without adding some additives. Okay? So what do I mean by additives? Okay, one common problem I see is exams, for example. I think people all know that examination has always been the culprit, but we're not quite sure why. Okay, basically, my sense is that assessment is necessary for learning, but our sense of assessment is very limited. Our assessment is for learning, not of learning. If we want to do any assessment of learning, we should not assign any consequence to that assessment. If we assign any consequences, for example, ranking, okay, we always would like to rank students. And then there's serious consequences to the ranking. Should learning be ranked? That is my challenge. I don't think we should rank our students. Okay? If we want to rank our students, use something else. Don't use assessment to lead our learning. So this is a very famous effect that people talk about, the backwash effect. Yeah, assessment was instituted to support our learning, but because we granted so much power that our assessment has a backwash effect, it actually affects how we learn, how we teach our children. We are teaching them to beat the exam, to climb up the ranking, rather than to focus on learning. So that is the backwash effect of the assessment. So these are, to me, are predictives of learning. We shouldn't have this. We should not have this in our learning. If we have that, then our learning is no longer organic. Another example is the standards. Okay, we all talk about we need to have standards, but we also talk about learning is not linear. But why are we designing our school in a linear fashion? So by grade 1, you should be learning this. Grade 2, you should be learning this. Where we know that our children are not, they are not growing up, they are not learning at the same rate. They have their own pace. Why can't we let them be more organic? Forget about standards. Okay, so these are our questions that I've been thinking about. So these got some implications to the learning. We talk about, are we talking about learning or schooling? Okay. I feel that most of the time we are talking about schooling. We are talking about how to help students to perform very well in exams. We are not talking about how to help students learn and learn better and learn better. And we kind of forget about learning as symbolic interaction. We try to treat language, or we try to fix the definition of language. And therefore, from young, we demand our children to find the correct answer, find the right definition. There's only one correct way of interpretation. But we know that when we use language, language is ambiguous and it's symbolic. And we are constantly making meanings at the abstract level. Okay? And et cetera, et cetera. That knowing, yeah, I prefer to use knowing rather than knowledge. Knowledge, kind of, we are fixing a thinking process. We call it knowledge. And then we want to impart knowledge to students, whereas students should be making sense, should be making meanings rather than absorbing knowledge. So they have this knowing process, but we may not want students to absorb knowledge. Okay, so these are just some implications. I'm not going to elaborate more. Let me quickly move on to what is evidence. Okay, is evidence fact, information, or what? If we take the earlier argument about learning involves language, and language is a symbolic interaction, we will realize that the pursuit for objectivity perhaps is not the way to go. There's no such thing as objectivity. Okay? Everything is subjective. If we want to be honest about our learning. Okay? Let me just give you an example of the Apple versus Windows. When I was studying at the University of Oregon, this was this very interesting piece of information. Somebody did a study on the use of computer and their GPA, their performance in their college. And their finding is that those people who use Windows PCs perform better in their GPA, whereas Apple, their GPA are lower. Okay, so this is the information. Okay. So very interestingly, Apple come up with an app based on this finding. Windows PC also come up with an advertisement for this piece of information. So Windows, of course, they will say, yeah, buy PC, buy Windows, because you will perform better in your GPA, right? So guess what is Apple's advertisement? So Apple also come up with a wonderful advertisement. They say, use Apple, yeah, because even low-performing college students can use it. Okay, so you can see that It's the same piece of information, same piece of so-called facts, but because of the interpretation, their implication could be very different and can be even opposite. So we really need to examine when we say we want our learning to be evidence-based. What kind of evidence should we collect, and how do we interpret the evidence? It's not as straightforward as what we would like to see. Let me give you another example. So this is a typical, can you see this? The words may not be important. Basically, there are 6 items on the left-hand side, and this is a teaching evaluation for a course. So this is quite typical. I'm sure you've seen something like this. So the first one is organization. The second one, knowledge, then presentation, clarity, relevance, enthusiasm. Okay, maybe you can tell that the first 5 items are all related to knowledge. They're all related to how teacher deliver the lesson, or construct or organize their knowledge so that students can absorb it. Okay, but if we take a more constructivist type of approach, or we look at the learning more organically, these may not be the kind of information that we would like to collect. So for example, we talk about embodied, okay? We know that our learning involves the whole body. Then how do we collect information about a person's learning? Perhaps we don't want to sit down, we don't want the students to sit down with paper and pencil answering multiple choice questions, okay? That is not consistent with this embodied idea of learning. And there are so many there are so many ideas that we can challenge, right? So if we talk about our learning is distributed, if we can accept that we wear glasses when we do the exam or when we do the assessment, why can't we accept students using calculators in their exams? What is their justification for that? Okay. If they learn it that way, why can't they use it? I think this was a debate in mass education, and now more and more institutes are allowing students to use calculators in their exams. But then again, that is just a small step. What about other tools? How about collaboration? We encourage students to collaborate, but in the exam, it's always individualistic. We encourage students to make mistakes. We encourage them and saying, if you make you learn from your errors, you make mistakes. Our attitude toward mistakes is that it should be a part and parcel of the learning process. However, when we subject our students to exams, when they make mistakes in the exams, we impose heavy penalty on them. Why? All this needs to be challenged, to me. Okay, I think I'll just stop here, and I would like to invite questions, and then so that we can take this further. I don't have all the answers. I see a lot of problems of our current practice, but in terms of workable solution, I think it's very much contextually bound. It is very much related to culture and societal values, and depends on how a region upholds a certain kind of value. So maybe we don't have a universal solution, but I would like to hear more from the audience, and then we can have some more discussion. Okay, so can I turn that to the audience and then maybe the moderator, so we can, yeah.
So, thank you, Dr. Chen, and then just we pause it at a moment. So anyone who would like to raise a question, welcome to, I distribute the QR code to you, and then also here with the QR code, and then you can join the discussion together. And then it's very good to have this technology so that Dr. Chen can view your questions, because you can make it anonymous as well. So don't be shy, no more shy here. Yeah. So you have maybe one minute for them to type some questions, maybe. So hope everyone is working on something, brainstorm something on the hat.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah, okay. So here comes a question. How to collect non-linear data or evidence? Yeah. Okay, how do I show it? Okay. Okay, so here comes a question. How to collect nonlinear data or evidence? Yeah. Any suggestions? To me, it's not so much about collecting nonlinear data, but rather we do not impose linear framework to students' learning. Does that make sense? As I just mentioned, why are we designing our school as grade 1, grade 2, grade 3? I think there were some attempts in the past that age is not necessarily the criteria for grouping. So we can group students based on their interests or based on their abilities, their current learning. I wouldn't say ability. Okay, everyone has the ability to learn, but their current understanding. And from there, we can help them. Does that answer the question? Anyone wants to follow up on that? I don't want to position myself as an expert, so I much prefer that somebody react to my responses, and then we can move on to the next question. Do we have any thoughts from the floor?
Okay, we can move on next question, maybe, because we put up a few more very interesting questions.
Okay, so maybe I'll just go through the next question. Okay, the next question is about big data. Oh. This one. Okay. Okay. How can we use big data to enhance student learning experience? To be very honest, I'm not convinced with the big data yet. I'm yet to be convinced. Big data to me are very partial. We only know that aspect of student learning. So for example, we collect all the clicks data of students' interaction online. That is the easiest way to collect information. that only reveals a very small part of students' learning. A teacher in the classroom observing students will be much more sensitive and much richer than big data. But that is just my personal bias. I would love someone to convince me.
Yeah, 1 second.
I'd just like to draw your attention to the notion of big data. So if we think about big data, you can gather information about students' well-being, their demographic data at a country level or a class level, and that means a classroom teacher who is doing assessments. For example, New Zealand have a criterion-based assessment, it's called ASTEL, where 98% of teachers use the assessments. That data is fed from the classroom about reading, numeracy, language, social studies, and fed up to a policy level. And for schools and teachers, what happens is at a policy level, they can connect data in relation to the workforce of teachers, target needs. So the idea is that big data is not just what you get from students online, but how you can connect the whole of the student, which is, I think, what you've been talking about. How do we relate whole body, the holistic approach of students, and understand why they're learning, why they're not learning, what factors are influencing their learning, just as we can with teachers. So from my perspective, there are several countries around the world that are demonstrating that big data is providing very valuable information for teachers, government levels, researchers to understand how better to teach and learn.
Thank you, Professor Clinton. She is one of our keynote speakers this morning, Professor Clinton. Yeah. So, Dr. Chen would like to add on anything?
Yeah, I agree with you that this kind of approach maybe will be more for policy making. So at the macro level, we will be able to use those data to inform our policy making. In terms of informing our classroom practice, I'm not quite sure the data is, the granularity of the data is fine enough to inform our practice. But a lot of research done.
Any more sharing on this question?
Yeah. Okay, the next question. The next question is about college education in the mainland China in general. Yeah. This is a bit different from what we are discussing now. So, and also I'm not familiar with the education system in mainland. So sorry, so maybe participants would like to share your views and how that is related to today's topic about evidence-based learning. What is your observation?
So anyone could maybe share a bit about the education in mainland, and then Dr. Chen can share a bit from Singapore as well. Yeah. So maybe we can hear Dr. Chen about how the situation in your university. How is it like the technology or big data? How the learning in evidence-based practice in your university?
Okay, I can speak about my experience in Singapore. Singapore is a very centralized education system and focus on exams very much. So I suppose it's very similar to Hong Kong, mainland, South Korea, this kind of country. The ministry here is trying very hard to move the students' and parents' attention from exams, even though that it is their predominant paradigm. They also try very hard to create multiple pathways for students who cannot perform well in academically, but they focus on arts or other aspects of learning. It is just at the beginning, and the culture is very difficult to change. Yeah. Does that answer the question? I'm not quite sure. Yeah. Yeah. Basically, we have a lot of talks at NIE. We are quite fortunate. It's a very unique relationship working with MOE, as our funding came from MOE, not from the university, even though we are situated within the larger university. Our academic promotion is governed by the university. However, we have to address a lot of issues that the MOE wants us to either study into or educate our teachers. So we have constant talk with the government. MOE are very, for example, just assessment, this issue of assessment, they are very aware of the backwash effect of the assessment. They are constantly turning to NIE for alternatives. Yeah, we know this is problematic, but we cannot give it up yet. We have to come up, these need to find a happy alternative that we are willing to try. So we have been working with MOE quite closely on this.
Okay, so anyone would like to raise up any question or sharing is okay too. It's welcome to share. So Dr. Chen would like to summarize anything and then just what you have mentioned about all these slides and questions, and then what you mentioned about the Singapore thing, and then so we would like to just wrap up something, and then so we can just really thankful for your this speech as well.
Yeah. Okay. So did I hear you clearly that you want me to do a summary?
Yes, summary. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you for this opportunity for sharing my frustration of what I've been doing. Yeah, it's quite frustrating to be thinking about learning issues related to learning and then reflecting on our design of the schooling. I don't have, as I mentioned, I don't have good solutions. I know more about the problem than the solution, and I think we need more people to join this journey to explore alternatives, trying to challenge our assumptions about our current design of schools, our schooling. Our current school was designed for industrial era, and we just want to fight literacy rate. But we have gone beyond that already. Now, can we focus more on learning? Can we less focus on exams? And if so, how can we do it and still achieve the purpose of ranking students? But at the same time, we want to focus on students' learning. All these are all big issues that I'm still struggling with. And, I thank you for your interaction and the discussion, and I hope that we can continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chen, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this really interactive keynote. Now it's the time for concurrent sessions. And right after that, the coffee break will start at 4 p.m. The panel session, Gamification in Evidence-Based Teaching and Learning, will start at 4:30 p.m. after the coffee break. And further details can be found in the program book. See you later.